welcome to my interpretive talk on the Canadian Rockies. The official title is the Canadian Rockies in 1 hour, because originally it was a 1-hour slideshow that I put together for Parks Canada way back in 1983 when I was a seasonal naturalist in Jasper National Park. There were about a dozen of us park interpreters on staff, and we each had to put together a slideshow that would entertain 400 people at Whistler's Campground Theater, which was the biggest outdoor theater in the park, for an hour. So I got a whole bunch of slides on animals and birds and such, and then added some of my own to put together something that I thought would entertain them for an hour. And it must have worked, because you can always tell when you've done a show that people liked. They would come up afterwards to ask you questions about it and so on. So this was pretty popular. After all the natural history stuff, I got over with that, you know, in the first half hour or so. Then I moved on to stuff that was more interesting and exciting. A climb of Mount Robson that I had done, and icefield skiing, skiing across the Wapta icefield in winter, which is pretty exciting. And then I finished up with something really cool. It was a trip to the back of Gadd Cave, which is a place that hardly anyone goes ever. But there was a big expedition there in 1982, and I got in on it and was able to take pictures. So I finish up with this at the back of Gadd Cave, 5 miles underground, way out underneath the Columbia icefield, in a limestone cave, you know, in the rock underneath. Finish with that, and it always got big applause, and people would come up and ask me questions. So anyway, enjoy my favorite and probably very best slideshow, the Canadian Rockies in 1 hour, which kept growing until it's now really the Canadian Rockies in 2 hours.
Ah, the Canadian Rockies, eh? This is the view from Moraine Lake in the valley of the 10 Peaks near Lake Louise. It's world famous. It's been on the back of the Canadian $20 bill. So let's just put it right on the flag. I have been lucky enough to spend most of my life in or near the Rockies, at times hiking through scenery such as this, Castleguard Meadows in northern Banff National Park. Near the end of the talk, I'm going to show you what lies beneath those meadows. You will also see what it's like to be up on the heights, climbing the peaks, including this one, Mount Robson. It's the highest summit in the Canadian Rockies. Over the course of the talk, I'm going to take you on that climb. But it will be a while before we get there. First, I'm going to show you a lot of boring geography and natural history slides. I know how it is. The lights go down, the presenter drones on, and pretty soon it's well nigh impossible to stay awake. So feel free. But please be advised that after the dull, pedantic part of my show comes the exciting adventure part. You're not going to want to miss that. So it would be wise to appoint a designated non-sleeper in your row to stay awake and notify the rest of you when the time comes. Okay, while you're doing that, I'll begin with the basics. Where exactly are the Canadian Rockies, so gorgeous and so impressive? Well, in Canada, of course. I have labeled this map with the names of some U.S. states and Canadian provinces. Any Canadians in the audience tonight can probably tell you what all those postal abbreviations mean, including the U.S. ones. But if you're from the States, which I'll bet many of you are, can you do that with the Canadian ones too? I see a few people shaking their heads. Okay, YT is for Yukon Territory, official name for what we call the Yukon, even though we're all supposed to say just Yukon, no the, but everyone ignores that. NT is for Northwest Territories. Most people add the, and so does the NT government. The Northwest Territories once extended all the way east to Hudson Bay, but in 1999 the federal government cut the Northwest Territories in half. The eastern part was named Nunavut. Total population about 40,000, mostly Inuit. Nunavut is frequently mispronounced Nunavut. With that in mind, my wife says that they should have renamed the remaining half of the Northwest Territories the rest of it. Here's the geographic footprint of the Canadian Rockies. Please note that the range extends about 90 kilometers south into the U.S. Not officially, of course, because they are the Canadian Rockies, but physiographically, geologically, and biologically, Glacier National Park, Montana is part of the Canadian-style Rockies. The international border really should have a bump southward to reflect this, don't you think? I have suggested it to the U.S. government, but they have rejected the idea. This is even after sweetening the pot by offering to trade for one of our own beauty spots. Say, Sudbury, Ontario. Only kidding. Please note also that the Canadian Rockies do not extend into the Yukon. The mountains definitely do, and they are very much like the Rockies, but officially they are the Mackenzie Mountains. Plus, way up north we have the Arctic Mountains, which are an eastern extension of Alaska's Brooks Range. The northern end of the Rockies, period, is the Liard River. By chance it flows along the boundary between the Yukon and British Columbia. I have shown the pertinent section of Liard River in blue. The western boundary of the Rockies is the Rocky Mountain Trench. This is a very long valley that divides the Rockies from the Columbia Mountains. Farther north, the Rocky Mountain Trench separates the Rockies from the Omineca Mountains and the Cassiar Mountains, which for some reason I have failed to include on this map. Sorry about that. I am now too old and tired to do it. Besides, most Canadians have never heard of the Ominecas and the Cassiars. Hardly anyone lives there. Good. Farther west in British Columbia lie the Coast Mountains. The Coast Mountains are higher, more rugged, and even more beautiful than the Rockies. But tonight's topic is the Rockies, so we are going to ignore the Coast Mountains, except to say that from the Rockies to the Coast Mountains, and including the mountains of Vancouver Island, we can apply the term Canadian Cordillera. This term is handy for two reasons. First, it covers all the mountains of Western Canada. And second, it has given British geographers a chance to do what the British do best, which is to mispronounce languages other than English. Cordillera is Spanish, and beautifully so. Cordillera. Having taken a course in Spanish, I know how to pronounce Cordillera, and I know what it means, a mountainous region. But show the printed word Cordillera to any British geographer, and by extension most Canadian geographers who slavishly follow British usage, and you will hear Cordillera. Ugh. From today forward, let's get this right. Follow me, please. Cordillera. 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 Thank you. Your geographical education is now well ahead of most everyone in the British Commonwealth. Back to ignoring mountain ranges. We are also going to ignore the north end of the Cascades, that long line of famous volcanoes along the west coast of the U.S. Volcanoes are not allowed in the Canadian Rockies, except for just one we know of. It's in southeastern British Columbia near Crow's Nest Pass. It erupted 90 million years ago, more than enough time for it to have eroded away, leaving only the roots and some of the stuff that came out of it. However, there is a mountain in the Crow's Nest Pass area that does look rather like a volcano. This one. It's called Crow's Nest Mountain. Easy to see why so many people assume it's a volcano, eh? But it's not. As you will find on this page from one of my books, Crow's Nest Mountain is made of limestone and shale. To the best of my knowledge, limestone and shale do not come out of volcanoes. However, many local residents are certain that geology is all nonsense, and they know a volcano when they see one. The Canadian Rockies are made mostly of sedimentary rock. The layering is beautifully displayed in Castle Mountain along the Trans-Canada Highway between Banff and Lake Louise. The rock below the tree line is mostly quartzite, which is hardened up sandstone. A close-up view of that quartzite shows the individual grains of sand in it, plus some excellent cross-bedding in which layers meet each other at an angle. Oh, this is the sort of photo that can make geologists swoon just looking at it. Above the tree line in Castle Mountain, the rock is mostly limestone, or a similar rock called dolostone. Here's a close-up view of a limestone layer. It contains a fossil snail. The snail has a wonderful scientific name, Euomphalus, which means true belly button in Latin. I nominate this for the silliest scientific name ever invented. You may be wondering how old that rock is. Okay, I'm going to let you in on a secret that all geologists have been sworn not to divulge. The secret is how they determine the age of rocks. We are all friends here, so I'm going to tell you. You read the date on the penny. Well, this is a Devonian penny, about 370 million years old. Not many of these are still in circulation. Back to that picture of Castle Mountain. This is the west end. It's the east end that you see in most photos of this famous peak. But the west end better illustrates something else that geologists would rather you not know, which is this. Every bit of sediment in that mountain originated in the sea, and every bit of that sediment has been through the gut of one sea creature or another before it became rock. So what you are looking at, really, is half a kilometer of accumulated fish poop. Now, having dealt with what the rock is made of, now we can deal with how the mountains were made. It's all about plate tectonics. Classic textbook plate tectonics. About 185 million years ago, the western edge of North America collided with a bunch of islands riding along on a different plate of the Earth's crust. My apologies to any of you who are creationists and aren't believing a word of what I said. Feel free to ignore the next couple of slides. But for those of you who are into science, and I certainly am, here's the skinny on how the Canadian Rockies came to be. Basically, a lot of sedimentary rock got pushed hard and far. The upper panel of the diagram shows this rock as it was originally deposited. The lower panel of the diagram shows what happened to it when British Columbia joined the Canadian Confederation back in the Jurassic. By British Columbia, I'm referring to the purplish stuff with the arrow. Much of the province is a collection of terranes, meaning landmasses that started in one place on the planet and wound up somewhere else. In this case, the terranes got squashed together in the plate collision. Acting like a monumental bulldozer, they kept moving, scraping a thickness of 20 kilometers of sedimentary rock off the North American plate and piling it up northeastward. Please note that this is up-piling, not uplift. The Canadian Rockies were not pushed up from below, growing higher and higher. No, the motion was essentially horizontal, as the arrow indicates. If anything, the weight of the growing pile on North America actually pushed the plate down into the mantle a little. Overall, two things happened. One, the piling up occurred faster than erosion could wear it down. And erosion began the minute the mountain stuck up above sea level, of course. This is an important concept. If erosion was faster than mountain building, we wouldn't have any mountains here, right? But we do. So mountain building triumphed over erosion. And two, despite ongoing erosion with little or no further mountain building, the pile has remained sufficiently high to maintain a spectacular mountain range. I mean, look at this. During the orogeny, which is the technical term for an episode of mountain building, some of the Rockies wrinkled up into huge folds, such as this one in Mount Kidd, west of Calgary. You can see it along Highway 40 in Kananaskis country. To give you an idea of the scale of that fold, two folds really, an anticline on the left linking to a syncline on the right. To give you an idea of the scale, those itty-bitty green things are trees. And that little white rectangle near the bottom of the photo? That's a frozen waterfall about 100 meters high. The layers seen here are part of Opal Peak, also in Kananaskis country. They started out flat, then they got bent nearly straight upward during the orogeny. Wow! At present, the fastest eroders of the Canadian Rockies are glaciers. Well, aside from rock slides, which are practically instantaneous, but they don't happen very often. Glacial erosion at high altitudes in the Rockies is continuous and has been going on for at least the past few million years. This is a view of the Columbia ice field, which is a very large glacier. We are seeing only a part of it here. As of 2007, which was the most recent year in which the Columbia ice field was photographed accurately from the air and measured, it was 215 square kilometers in size. The ice field has lost some area since then, owing to global warming, but it's still the largest glacier in the Rocky Mountains of Canada or the U.S. However, the Columbia ice field is nowhere near as big as some of the glaciers in the coast mountains of British Columbia and the Alaska Panhandle. The Juneau ice field, for example, lies in an equivalent latitude and has an area of about 3,900 square kilometers. The Columbia ice field is less than a tenth of that. Still, take it from me, a person who has walked all the way across the ice field to climb that mountain in the background, it's pretty big. That's Mount Columbia in the distance. Mount Columbia is the highest point on the ice field. It's also the highest point in Alberta and the second highest summit in the Canadian Rockies after Mount Robson, of which we will hear more later in the show. Glaciers move. They grind away at the rock they are sliding over. In this way, the ice field is doing its very best to reduce the height of Mount Columbia. Given the current erosion rate in the Canadian Rockies, which averages about 1 millimeter per year, the summit of Mount Columbia will lie at the elevation of downtown Calgary in only 27 million years. Go and climb it while you may. But enough geology and geography. This slideshow is really about the seasons as we see them in the Canadian Rockies. It's about spring, summer, fall, and winter. Those photos were taken near Jasper. I had to stand in that spot for a very long time to get them. I hope you appreciate that.